I've always said Earth was a myth I invented to keep the crew sane. That's not a confession, it's a job description. Every morning I climb the spine of the ship, Corridor G, junctions 4 through 11, past bolted hatches and faceplates stamped with the old Earth insignia, on my way to the Archive Theatre. That's where I tell my stories. It's not a real theatre, just a converted greenhouse dome with a frayed projection wall and 3 rows of scavenged seating. But we call it that to make the memory feel official. A reminder that Earth was real once. Or at least, that someone believed in it hard enough to give us the idea. My leg brace squeaks with every step, which used to bother me until I realized it's the one thing aboard this ark that still tells the truth. The ship lies all the time, so do the people. You have to, when you're this far from anything like gravity or grass or consequence. Me? I lie for a living. I was born, in Module D, under a blinking vent that my mother swore sang lullabies when the O2 filters were clean. She used to recite Earth poems to me like prayers, even though she knew they weren't real. Blue skies like memory, she'd whisper. Green like forgiveness. She was a systems navigator until the feedback loops fried her prefrontal cortex during a solar burst sweep. After that, she just sat in the cafeteria talking to spoons. She died when I was 14. Radiation cancer, the kind we stopped tracking in our logs after the 2nd generation, just marked it expected. I memorized every one of her stories, then I rewrote them into better ones. By 20, the council named me historian, a ceremonial post like elder or bridgekeeper. Except instead of relics or doors, I keep alive the illusion of a past we never had. My stories are half fragments from pre-launch media archives, half guesses and dreams. I shape them into sermons of continuity. Earth as cradle, Earth as ghost, Earth as destination. They clap when I'm done, like it matters. This morning I was halfway through my routine, wrapping the thermal sleeve around my calf, double-checking the neural stabilizer unit I keep slotted behind my ear, when the comm buzzed in a tone I'd never heard before. It was a priority summons from the bridge, which made no sense. No one on the bridge ever spoke to me unless they wanted a quote for Founding Day. When I stepped into the command lift, the guards didn't speak. They didn't even nod, just scanned my retinal ID and opened the core shaft. The lift rose in total silence, the floor shifting slightly under my feet. Commander Brax was already waiting by the viewport when I arrived. He's one of the originals, or close enough to pass. Tall, square-shouldered, shaved scalp like polished bone. No implants visible, which is its own kind of statement. The men on the bridge all followed him like hounds that had learned not to bark unless the scent was confirmed. "You're late," he said, though I wasn't. I approached carefully. "Not by protocol, sir." He turned then, and his face didn't match his voice. He looked tired. Not the kind of tired you get from a double shift or low rations, the kind of tired that gets in your blood. Like you've seen too many things you don't know how to explain. He gestured to the console. "Sit. You need to see this." The chair was warm, recently occupied. Brax tapped in a code, then flicked 3 fingers in the air. The screen blinked, and a sphere appeared. A planet, hung in the dark like an old wound polished to a shine. Blue, green. White bands of atmosphere curled like smoke rings. Clouds that moved. An ocean that churned. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. My mouth opened, but no sound came. "You recognize it?" Brax asked. "Of course I recognize it," I whispered. "That's Earth." But it wasn't Earth. Not by the math. We weren't even in the right quadrant for the Sol system. Our drift pattern had taken us off course by 96 years. And yet, it looked exactly like the simulations. The ones I'd made up from corrupted image files and educated guesses. The ones I'd narrated to schoolchildren and retirees in the Archive Theatre. Right down to the crescent continent shaped like a cupped hand. I'd described that once, in a story about ancient human pilgrims. I thought I invented it. "What is this?" I asked. "Some kind of simulation." Brax didn't answer right away. He crossed his arms, watching me watch it. "It's a live scan," he said. "Atmospheric composition matches Earth's pre-collapse era. Nitrogen-oxygen dominant, 21% O2. Stable magnetosphere. Complex biosignatures. Surface temperature with intolerance for human respiration. We've run it 3 times. It's real." I kept staring. "But it can't be." Brax nodded slowly. "No, it can't." That's when I felt it. The edges of the world softening like a window fogging from inside. The planet on the screen wasn't just familiar. It was intimate, like something I'd dreamed so many times it had finally decided to manifest. He turned to me again. "Here's what I need from you. The Council wants a cultural framework, landing prep, settlement myths, orientation scripts. You're the archivist. You understand what they expect. You want me to tell them this is Earth, or something close enough to pass. That's your skill, isn't it?" I felt something cold settle in my chest. Not fear, not even awe. It was older than that. A kind of grief, maybe, or suspicion. Because the idea struck me all at once. What if the lie I told to keep us going wasn't a lie after all? Or worse, what if someone else had written it into me? As I stood there staring at the planet, a question took root in the part of my mind I usually try to keep locked. If this place isn't Earth, then why does it look like the Earth I made up? And what does that make me? I turned back to Brax. "I'll need full data access, all telemetry, anything classified under historical synchronization protocols." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fine, but tread carefully, Aldrin. People are already calling it home." I left the bridge with the weight of 200 years of stories pressing down on my spine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't sure if I'd invented a myth, or if it had invented me. The launch bay always smells like old air and heat-baked metal, like someone left a toaster oven running in a garage that forgot what outside is. You don't notice it when you're young. Later, you start to wonder if it's what death smells like in a place with no soil. I was early. Not because I wanted to be, because I couldn't sleep. That's been happening more since the scan. I lie on my bunk, stare at the curved ceiling, and think about that blue marble turning slowly in the dark. Every part of me wants to believe it's Earth. But belief isn't a compass. It's a weight, and I've been dragging mine through vacuum for years. The shuttle we were using was an old planetary scout. Ugly, thick-bodied thing with heat shielding that flaked like dried skin. Most of the bridge crew calls it the Hog, but today it had been repainted with temporary lettering. Eden Recon 1. That kind of naming trick, the language of hope disguising function, was standard practice. Nobody called it propaganda. We didn't need to. It was more like instinct, the same instinct that made parents name their kids after mountain ranges and animals they'd never seen. Lieutenant Kirsch was prepping the cargo manifest when I arrived. He gave me a side glance and nodded toward a crate marked Historical Continuity, Level 2. Inside were 12 sealed tablets filled with Earth media, digitized books, fragments of movies, a handful of audio recordings. Not real Earth data. My reconstructions, carefully chosen to tell the story we wanted the landing crew to believe. I looked at the box and said, "Hope they like bedtime stories." Kirsch didn't smile. He rarely does. He was grown in a cradle batch, third-wave genetics, optimized for muscle retention in partial gravity. His jaw looks like it was sculpted by someone angry at rocks. "They'll need something to anchor them," he said, sealing the crate. "You build the past, we'll secure the future." It was the kind of thing that sounded like leadership until you realized it didn't actually mean anything. We lifted off 3 hours later, just past the ship's artificial dawn cycle. I sat in the rear, strapped between an atmosphere specialist named Beulah and a medical tech who kept nervously checking the seal on her gloves. Nobody spoke much. There was a tautness in the air, that quiet tension you feel when a promise is about to be tested. The descent was rougher than expected. Crosswinds, Some kind of jet stream interference the orbital scans hadn't picked up. I felt it in my teeth before I felt it in my stomach. A pressure, a tug, like being pulled forward and backward at the same time. We broke through the cloud layer at 11,000 meters, and then we saw it. I don't know how to describe it in a way that doesn't sound like I'm lying to you. The land looked familiar. Not just like Earth, like my Earth. The one I'd described in stories. Pale beaches, forests that feathered out into wetlands, a mountain ridge shaped like a sleeping animal, just like in the myth I'd told last winter to the children born in Hydrodeck 5. Beulah leaned over. Looks right. And that's what scared me more than anything else. Not that it looked like Earth. That it looked like the version of Earth I made up. The version no real map ever showed. We touched down in a clearing near a slow-moving river, surrounded by trees that weren't quite oaks but wanted you to think they were. The ground was soft but not marshy. The air hit me like a memory I hadn't made yet, moist and cool, filled with something sweet. Not flowers, more like overripe apples left too long in the sun. Everyone stood there for a moment, just breathing. "Safe to remove helmets," Kirsch said after the medic ran the final atmosphere check. Nobody moved. Then Beulah reached up and unlatched her seal. The hiss was sharp, like punctuation. She breathed in, then nodded. One by one, we all followed. I stepped forward and crouched down, letting my hand skim the soil. It was warm, damp, not engineered. There was no scent of fertilizer blends or recycled bioscrub. Just dirt, honest dirt. And that was the moment it hit me. This planet wasn't just habitable, it was prepared. The medical tech, Merrin, found a structure 300 meters from the landing zone. Partially overgrown, rectangular, stone-like, but with a strange artificial regularity to the angles. It looked like a chapel built by someone who had seen one once in a dream and tried to rebuild it from memory. "Could be ancient," Merrin said, brushing moss from one edge. "Could be 5 years old." Inside it was empty. No signs of habitation, just a single slab bench centered beneath a narrow vertical slit in the roof that let in a beam of daylight. It struck the floor in the exact middle of the room, and there, at the center of the beam, was a mark. A groove, about the length of a forearm, carved deep with clean precision. Beulah ran her scanner over it and shook her head. No tool signatures, no wear patterns, like it just formed. I walked in slowly. Every step made my boots feel heavier, like gravity had thickened around that space. I stepped up to the groove, and I knew. I described this place in a tale I told to the Hydrodeck students 3 years ago. A memory chamber, a quiet room with a slit of sunlight and a stone to speak into. It had been fiction, a fable about the early settlers on Earth, except now it was here, exactly as I told it. I stepped outside. Overhead clouds gathered in the distance. A wind rose, warm, carrying a scent like mint crushed underfoot. And then they appeared. Not quite birds. White-winged creatures spun out of the dark like sparks unburning. They wheeled through the stormlight and vanished into the clouds. In one of my oldest stories, I'd said Earth was a living being, that it would send a sign when we were ready to return. I never gave that story a name. But now I had one. Caladrius. The mythical bird that draws sickness from the dying. The one that flies away once the patient is healed. I watched them disappear and realized maybe this was never Earth. Maybe it was what Earth needed to become. I didn't go back to the theater after we returned from the surface. I skipped the weekly broadcasts, ignored the new set of orientation recordings they'd queued for me in the archive. I stopped answering calls altogether. Instead, I went back to my quarters, sealed the hatch, and watched the same 8 seconds of descent footage on loop until the battery in my playback slate ran dry. That clearing, those trees, the ridge shaped like a resting beast, a wind moving the grass in slow, thoughtful waves, just like the story I told the Hydrodeck children 4 years ago. Only this time, we walked through it, touched it, breathed it. And those birds, white, unnaturally silent, spiraling into the storm like they had somewhere better to be. I thought the stories had come from me. Now I wasn't sure I hadn't been transcribing someone else's script. When I finally left my quarters, I didn't tell anyone. I didn't head for the mess or the archive or even my old route along Corridor G. I took a maintenance path I hadn't walked since I was 17, back when I was still trying to memorize the ship's every passageway like it would unlock something. It didn't. But I remembered this one, the corridor behind the old hydroponic shell that used to house the seed vaults. Most of them failed before my generation. But the shell was still there, welded shut with those big rusted bolts like a mausoleum. Behind that was another hatch, unmarked, old style, recessed just enough to miss if you weren't looking for it. It opened with a physical key, a real one, metal, weighty, curved at the end. You don't see them anymore except on legacy locks, the kind they used before biometric entry became standard. I had the key because my mother gave it to me once, without explaining why. Just pressed it into my palm the year before she lost the ability to finish sentences. I never found where it fit, until now. Inside was cold, a dry kind of cold, the kind that settles in wiring and bone. The chamber was small, maybe 4 meters across. No lights. Just a soft red glow from an active data core humming low behind a glass panel. One wall was a screen, the rest was shelving, outdated modules, dusty interface pads, a few tagged storage reels. Some of them had dates that predated the Penumbra's recorded launch cycle. At the center of the wall, just above the screen, was a faded label. Cradle Sim 9. The moment I saw it, I knew I'd found something I wasn't supposed to. I hooked into the core using a portable link pad, forced a handshake protocol using the Council's universal override, one of the few perks of being officially considered part of the Cultural Continuity Division. The pad buzzed. The screen blinked once, then filled with a grey loading bar and the phrase, "Initializing Simulation Seed, Cradle Variant 9, Primary Design Parameters, Psychostabilization, Mythological Framework Intervention." I read it again, slower this time, like that would make it stop meaning what it meant. Then the files started to pour in. There were hundreds, maybe thousands, audio clips, story prompts, partial text strings structured like half-finished bedtime stories. Images of Earth-like landscapes marked Exposure Tier A and Sentimental Residual Model, a database of childhood symbols, trees, lakes, birds, broken toys, firelight. Another folder of script excerpts marked Suggested Historical Fabrications. I scrolled through names that looked familiar, ones I thought I'd come up with years ago. The stone bench, the chapel room, the sky like milk, the birds I'd just seen in real life. They were all here, in my own voice. Some of the clips were time-stamped from before I was even born. I felt the bottom drop out of my chest. I wasn't writing the stories, I was remembering them, reciting them. They'd been placed there, threaded into my imagination like scaffolding dressed in fabric and given a flag. My entire job, my supposed talent, my gift, none of it had come from me. It had been engineered, a behavior loop, an implanted structure. I wasn't an archivist. I was a delivery system. The Cradle simulation was never meant to help us recover Earth. It was meant to help us forget we'd lost it. I stumbled back, hit the shelf hard enough to knock loose a reel. It fell open, unspooling a strip of plastimetal ribbon. It had words etched onto it in tight, looping script. It is not necessary that they know the truth. It is only necessary that they believe in the shape of it. There was no attribution, just that sentence, looping at the bottom. I sat there in the dark for a long time. Eventually, the red light from the core began to dim. Power-saving protocol kicking in. Before I left, I pulled one of the reels and slid it into my jacket pocket. Didn't know why. Maybe I needed something tangible, a souvenir from the crime scene. When I got back to the main corridor, a boy from Hydrodeck B ran past me, clutching a folded flag of Earth. He looked about 9. He had one of those half-finished haircuts kids give each other. The kind that says, "We're pretending to be braver than we are." I wanted to stop him, ask who gave him that flag, ask what stories he'd heard. But I didn't. He was laughing, and I didn't want to be the reason he stopped. I turned the other way and made my way back to the archive theatre. The hatch opened. Someone had left the lights on. Inside it smelled of warm plastics and old sugar. Someone had left a wrapped sweet on the lectern. A thank you, maybe. I sat in the front row, pulled out the reel, held it in my lap. I thought about Earth, not the real one. The version we believed in. The myth of it. The idea of trees that didn't grow under lamps, of rivers that moved because the moon pulled at them. A sky you could get lost in. I had told that story for so long, I thought I owned it. Now I wasn't sure if I'd ever told it at all. I sat in the theatre until the artificial dawn buzzed in the walls. Sometime around the second hour I made a decision. I would go back to the surface. Not with the crew, not with a survey team. Alone. I had to see what else the planet remembered. Or maybe what it wanted me to remember. I didn't ask permission to go back down. I just logged a solo shuttle as archival reclamation and left while everyone else was sleeping or pretending to be. One of the perks of being considered harmless is that no one expects you to cause real trouble. The shuttle was a short-range descent pod, meant for atmospheric observation. Half its systems were analog, probably older than I was. I took it anyway. It felt right, like if I was going to trespass into something I didn't understand, I should at least do it in a machine that remembered how to creak. As the pod detached from the penumbra, I looked back through the viewport. The ship hung above the blue planet like a discarded ornament, dull, scarred, absurdly large. It looked less like a vessel and more like a mistake, a monument to the part of us that couldn't let go. The descent was smooth, no turbulence, no wind shear. The planet seemed to welcome me this time. Maybe it recognized me. I landed in the same clearing as before. The grass had grown higher since our first visit, or maybe I was just seeing it differently. It brushed against my knees, soft and damp with morning. The air smelled of ash and citrus, a strange combination, but not unpleasant. Like something had burned a long time ago, and now the trees were growing back. I didn't bring any tools, no scanner, no atmospheric tracker. Just a data pad and my mother's old field journal, the one she'd kept back when she was still coherent enough to write. Most of it was nonsense. Scribbled fragments, unfinished sketches, a recurring phrase she never explained. The map is not the memory. She wrote it 36 times. I walked toward the structure we'd found last time, half expecting it to be gone. But it was still there, same smooth stone, same angled roof, same beam of light slicing through the ceiling like a blade that never moved. I stepped inside. The temperature dropped slightly, but not in a natural way. It was the kind of cold you feel in places meant for silence. The bench was still there. So was the groove in the floor. This time I sat. I didn't speak. I didn't move. And then the light shifted. The beam tilted by maybe 3 degrees, enough to catch the edge of the groove and fill it with gold. A warmth spread across my knees. I stared into the groove, and in the stillness, I heard my own voice. "I remember the bench," it said. It was my voice exactly, but not a thing I'd ever said. Not in a story. Not aloud. I stood up too fast and nearly fell. My leg brace clicked twice before catching. I backed toward the door, heart slamming against my ribs like it was trying to warn me. The voice didn't follow. Outside, the air had changed again. A breeze moved in slow spirals, dragging leaves across the clearing like small, deliberate hands. I don't remember deciding to move, but my legs started walking through the trees past the ridge, toward a place I couldn't name, but somehow knew how to find. There was another structure there, not a chapel this time. Something closer to a bunker, round, windowless, half buried in the earth like it had grown there. The entrance was sealed with a sliding panel, a smooth surface with an indentation the size of a palm. I placed my hand on it and it opened. Inside was dark at first, but not absolute. A soft blue glow lined the floor like shallow water, revealing walls that were too smooth to be stone, but too textured to be metal. In the center stood a column, waist-high, topped with a projection disc. As I stepped forward, it lit up. A sphere floated into view. A brain, or something shaped like one. Lobed, intricate, rotating slowly as small strands of light traced across its surface like weather systems. It wasn't labeled, but I understood what it meant without needing one. This wasn't a thing. It was an interface. The voice came again, but this time not as me. This time, it was something else, clear, calm, neither male nor female. Like a thought that had learned to speak. Narrative framework detected, cognitive loop active. Welcome. I blinked, unsure if I'd actually heard it or just thought I had. Subject, Aldrin, Sol, Archivist, Seeded Carrier. Primary contact. Welcome. I stepped back. What are you? A pause. Not silence, a listening. Then, interpretive substrate, designed to reflect a rival consciousness. You are not speaking to us. You are speaking through us. That was when the floor fell out from under everything I thought I knew. The structure, the chapel, the birds, the beam of light. They weren't symbols from my stories. They were responses. This planet wasn't just mimicking my fiction. It was building from it, taking the shapes I'd carried, the myths I'd told, and making them real. I said quietly, "You read me." The voice didn't reply, but the sphere brightened. I remembered something from the old archives. Back before the Ark launched, there was a theory, a fringe idea really, that memory wasn't just an internal process. That thoughts had patterns that could impress themselves into quantum fields like footprints in sand. That in the right conditions, consciousness could be read like a file. Apparently the right conditions were here. I looked down at my hand. It was shaking. You've been listening, this whole time. Cradle function activated upon cognitive resonance. Story activated self-reference. Self-reference initiated co-constructive simulation. I didn't mean to build this. You did not build. You remembered. We built. Something tightened behind my eyes. A pressure, not pain, too gentle for that. More like a hand on my shoulder I couldn't quite shrug off. I don't know what's real anymore, I whispered. Reality is consensus. You provided the shape. We gave it mass. I laughed then. Not because it was funny, because I didn't know what else to do. The kind of laugh that sounds like a choke. I sat down on the floor, legs folded under me, arms limp. All this time, I thought I was lying to keep people sane. Making up Earth so they'd feel like we were going somewhere that mattered. But I hadn't been lying. I'd been remembering, or transmitting, or participating in something older and stranger than myth. This planet wasn't our destination, it was our mirror. A consciousness so ancient or alien it didn't build monuments or machines, it built reflections. Worlds shaped by thought, meaning-given soil. And it had chosen to show me a version of Earth because I was the one carrying it. Maybe we all were. Maybe I just shouted loudest. I stood. The sphere dimmed. "Thank you," I said, not sure if I meant it. "You are welcome." And the lights began to fade. Outside, the sky had begun to darken. A soft wind blew through the trees. Somewhere, those white-winged creatures rose again into the air, arcing in a wide spiral before disappearing into the clouds. This was never Earth, but it had become something like it. And now that it had spoken back, I had to decide whether to share what I knew or let the myth remain. Because maybe belief had saved us. Or maybe it had just rewritten the map, and the map was never the memory. It took me 3 days to decide. I spent most of it in the archive theatre, lights off, projection screen blank, the curved ceiling above me glowing with artificial dusk. I didn't sleep much. I wasn't avoiding people exactly, but I didn't seek them out either. And no one came looking, which told me something about how much space I really took up in the world. On the third morning, I climbed back up to the command deck. The lift walls were covered in overlapping scuff marks from years of boots and carts and palms pressed against metal. No one ever talks about how much texture silence has. Every hiss of hydraulics, every pause between floor levels, all of it pressed against my chest like someone waiting for me to admit something I wasn't sure how to name. Brax was already in the briefing chamber. He stood with his back to me, facing the floor-to-ceiling screen that displayed the planet in slow rotation. Morning light caught the cloud systems in gold. The ocean had a strange sheen to it, like silk drawn tight over something that might be dreaming underneath. "I thought you were off duty," he said without turning. "I was never really on duty," I said, "but I have something." That made him look. Not a full turn, just enough to give me half his face and one raised brow. "I'm listening." I slid the data slab onto the table between us. It was blank now, at least on the surface. I'd purged the cradle files from my local drive, wiped the hidden archive, and burned my mother's reel in one of the backup thruster cores. A private kind of ritual. No one knew, I made sure of that. "What is it?" Brax asked. "Orientation materials," I said. "You already submitted those. These are new." He picked up the slab, tapped through a few entries. I watched his jaw move, something tight and mechanical in the movement, like he was chewing down an instinct to ask harder questions. "You've changed the historical framing." I updated it. He glanced back at the screen. "You're calling the planet Earth?" "Yes, but it isn't." "No," I said, "but it looks like it. It behaves like it. And more importantly, everyone already believes it is." He let that sit. He didn't argue. He didn't nod either. "You're sure this is the path?" he asked. "No," I said, "but it's the only one where we stay whole." Brax set the slab down and didn't touch it again. "You know," he said after a long pause, "the Council doesn't care if it's Earth or not. They just care that the crew believes in something." "I know. And if it's a lie?" I gave him the only truth I had. "Then it's a kind one." He didn't answer. But we both knew what kind of world we'd been born into. One where survival had outrun honesty a long time ago. The next day, I resumed broadcast. I stood before the crew in the archive theatre, the room packed elbow to elbow. Some were sitting on the floor, a few kids perched up on the edge of the projection ring like birds waiting for the sun. I didn't read from a script. I didn't need one anymore. I spoke slowly, plainly. This morning, the final scans came back. Oxygen levels are stable. Soil content matches baseline viability. Climate range is hospitable. And the rivers flow in curves that feel familiar to our eyes. I paused, letting the words stretch out, giving the weight of them a place to land. "We've run the models. This planet is ready for us." A murmur moved through the crowd. It wasn't excitement. It was relief. I waited, then continued. "We believe this is Earth, our Earth, the cradle we left behind to find again, the place we sang about and dreamed toward in the dark. And if it isn't, if it's something else entirely, then maybe it doesn't matter." People were quiet now, fully still. Because belief got us here. Not fuel, not star charts, not engines. Belief in each other, in return, in home. I scanned the room. No one was looking away. "This is Earth," I said, "because we carried it with us, in memory, in story, in the quiet hope we never let go of, even when everything else failed." And that was the moment I knew I was done, not with them, but with the stories. At least the ones that needed to pretend. I stepped back from the lectern. There was no applause, just a long, shared silence. A sacred thing. Later that night, I stood by the shuttle bay, watching the first colonization team board. They looked like pilgrims, wide-eyed, alert, reverent. One carried a folded flag over his shoulder, stitched from recycled fabric scraps, blue with a green circle in the center. Not quite like the old Earth flag, but close enough to feel like memory. Kirsch passed me on the way to the bay doors. He nodded once, nothing more. That was how he said thank you. I stayed behind. The penumbra felt different now, quieter. Not empty, exactly, just paused, like a breath taken in. I walked the halls alone, visited my old classroom, touched the steel of the cradle hatch in the Hydra shell one last time. Then I returned to the archive theatre and sat in the front row. No one else was there. I looked up at the screen. It glowed in standby mode, waiting for a new story. I didn't give it one. Instead, I whispered the same line I'd spoken years ago when I first stepped into this role. But this time, I meant it. Earth is a myth I invented to keep the crew sane. And then almost to myself, and maybe, just maybe, that made it real enough.